Good day, everyone. As promised during our synchronous session, here is the discussion video on special education. At the end of this discussion, you should be able to have 85% proficiency in determining the scope of special education, in reflecting on the evolution of the concept of special education, and in developing projects in relation to the issues and trends in inclusion and inclusive education. The third objective, as usual, will be used for your exploratory activity. Before we dwell further on the idea of special education, I want to show you this picture. When you look at this picture, what do you think about? And how do you relate that with the concept of special education? So, according to Waltham, distributing resources equally does not provide everyone with equal opportunities. Basically, that's the description for the first picture. Everyone has equal share of resources. However, since they have different needs, not everyone could enjoy the same level of opportunities, which is why resources need to be allocated according to the needs of each individual, and that is what is shown in the middle panel, which is labeled as equity. However, in reality, the last panel, the children in the greatest need are often the one who receive the least resources. Just like when we were discussing about how the marginalized are the ones that become discriminated and that do not really get much opportunities compared to those who already have a privilege. This idea is related to special education or special needs education in a sense that as teachers, we should be able to plan instruction and use strategies and approach with which we could give equitable chances and opportunities based on the needs of our learners. And that is how special education falls under inclusive education. In this sense, when we define what special education is, we could say that special education is specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs and abilities of exceptional students, or those students with different and additional needs. Historically, people with disabilities were often placed in hospitals, asylums, or other institutions that provide little or maybe even no education. This is because historically we look at persons with disability through the lens of the medical model. However, in the present, we are already looking at them through the lens of the social model. So, how are these two models different from each other? This is actually the models that I was discussing about in the inclusive education discussion. We have the medical model on the left side and the social model on the right. When we look at these two models, it is quite obvious that the idea of inclusive education is based on the social model of disability. However, on the left side, when we look at the medical model of disability, this has been the mindset of people from way back. This is where we evolved from. The medical model of disability is now regarded as being a negative approach to disability because people may be viewed as being less able because of their disability. In a sense, it means that their whole personality gets devalued just because they have this specific disability. On the other hand, when we compare that to the social model is a way of understanding that people are disabled because of barriers in society rather than by being different or having impairments. Later on, we will have a contextualized example of this, but let us first run through the principles or ideas of the medical model and the social model and how are they different. As you can see on the medical model, it states there that the child is faulty. And because we look at the child as faulty, we give them a diagnosis based on that thing that we see as wrong with them. When we give diagnosis to the child or to the person, it proceeds to labeling. And when you have a label or a category established, that label or that category becomes the focus of the attention and not the child. It's the impairment or the disability that becomes the focus of the attention. Remember when we had the first activity in inclusive education when we tried to break the stereotypes? Because sometimes when we look at stereotypes or labels or categories, those become boxes that delimit how people can see us and how we see ourselves. And that is the same. That is actually what happens when we label children with these disabilities, in which their impairment becomes their personality or their whole identity for some people. So, when their impairment becomes the focus of the attention, an assessment, monitoring, and other programs related to therapy are imposed to probably cure the disability. And once we have imposed those assessment, monitoring, and other programs of therapy, segregation, and providing alternative services for persons with disabilities become the default way of interacting and treating them. When that becomes the default way of treating or interacting with persons with disabilities, their ordinary needs gets put on hold, in which their extraordinary needs are the ones that we try to develop. If we develop those extraordinary needs enough, we are the ones who judge the children or the person with disability if they could re-enter the society if we see them as normal enough. However, if we don't see them as behaving as normal as the society wants them to do, we permanently exclude them. So that's the idea of the medical model. The medical model is the one where we try to fit the child in the mold that the society aims for, or the mold that the society thinks is normal. We ask the child to transform themselves for the society. However, that is the core difference of the medical model from the social model, because in the social model, we see it in a way in which the society is the one that has to transform itself to accommodate the child. So let's discuss the social model more in depth. In the social model, the child is valued. We do not see them as faulty. We see their strengths and needs defined by themselves as well as by others. We look for outcome-based programs that are specifically designed for them. We plan with them on what they want to target by the end of the program, and we also collaborate with them. In line with the designed outcome-based program, resources are made available to what we call as ordinary services. Aside from resources, training for parents and other professionals are also provided, which in turn results in a nurtured relationship among the support system of the person with disability, with which we show and welcome the mindset of diversity, that there are differences among people. And because of that mindset, because of that acceptance of diversity, the society itself evolves. Now, to give a more concrete example of the difference between the medical model and the social model, please look at this picture that I got from the website of Epic Employment Incorporated. As you can see here, we have on the left again is the medical model, and on the right is the social model. The first one, we have the tagline of the medical model: I need to be fixed to fit in with society. On the other hand, the tagline of the social model is society needs to change so I can fit in. How do we give concrete examples of those differences? Let's look at the yellow boxes first. In the medical model, the mindset is this: I can't go to the cinemas because I am deaf. However, on the social model, we look at it this way: I can't go to the cinema because the cinema is not providing closed captions. When we provide closed captions, we make an effort to make the cinema more inclusive, right? Not only for deaf people, but also for those who prefer having closed captions when they are watching something. Let's go to the red box. On the medical model, the idea or mindset is I can't go to a cafe by myself because I am blind. On the other hand, when we look at the social model, the mindset is the cafe hasn't provided Braille or any electronic menu options, so I cannot go there by myself. When we provide a Braille system in the cafe or even just voice automated menu options, we make the cafe more inclusive. And the last concrete example is on the blue tile. I can't work here because I can't go upstairs. When we look at the social model, the mindset is the building doesn't have a lift or a ramp. So those are the concrete examples of how the mindset of the medical model versus the social model differs in application in everyday life or in concrete experiences of individuals. See how great the society looks like, that it accommodates everyone and it changes itself so that it could provide equal opportunities and it could give the needs of all the people within the society. That's how great the social model is. And if you think about it, we are really lucky right now that we are living in the time when the social model is the prevailing model that is being used. I cannot fathom the experiences of those that have lived when the prevailing model was the medical model. So now, the question is, how did the mindset evolve from looking at persons with disabilities or differently abled persons through the medical model lens towards what we have now, which is the social model lens? Let's look at that shift in the mindset through studying the history of special education. First, we have the Greek and Roman era, which is labeled as the era of extermination. In this era, disability is considered as a punishment of the gods, and it is considered as a bad or evil sign. They also think that a person with disability will be like that forever and there is nothing that we can do about it because, again, it is a punishment given by the gods for that person. It even came to a point when notable philosophers like Aristotle and Plato were observed to have written on their accounts that persons with disabilities or those who were born different should be separated from the general society or from the normal society. It is being argued whether Aristotle and Plato support infanticide because at that point in time during the Greek and Roman era, infanticide was okay because their mindset of having a pure race or a society that is free from what they call as defectives based on what Cicero was saying. Actually, when you think about it, it's probably because there is a need for military superiority, intellectual superiority at that point in time. So they see people with disabilities as defectives, and if they could only purge them, they would. That's the idea during the era of extermination. Persons with disabilities are chained, left alone on the hills to die, or thrown off cliffs, or even locked away and intentionally drowned. It is the father who has the right to terminate a child's life. After the era of extermination comes the BCE or before Common Era. In some historical accounts, this is labeled as the Old Testament era, but since I am aiming for inclusivity of beliefs, I used before Common Era instead of the religious term. The prevailing idea in the BCE or the before Common Era is that God created man in his own image, which is why if you have a disability, it's considered an impurity because why are you different from us if all of us people are created from God's image? That's the question. That's why disabled persons are considered impure to the point that disabled persons are not allowed to go to sacred places. However, this practice was changed a bit during the Common Era, or for religious references, the New Testament. Even if the prevailing concept is still God created man in his own image, the prophets like Jesus helped disabled persons. This is why disability was seen as less of a fault or an evil sign. People with disability were considered to need help and assistance. And when you help persons with disabilities, it will improve your chances at being saved or winning salvation. So, during the Common Era, the idea of persons with disability became a bit light as compared to the eras before it. However, during the medieval era, another downfall on the history of persons with disabilities and special education happened, and that is the era of ridicule. Because in the medieval era, those with disabilities are discriminated, ridiculed, objectified, or killed. Persons with disabilities were used as servants or fools, and other disabilities or differences in physical appearance was used so that someone could be a source of entertainment, like dwarfs were used as clowns. Overall, people with deformities and different behavior were ridiculed just because they were different at that point in time. This status quo was challenged and changed again during the Renaissance era, which is known as the era of the Asylum. Those with disabilities were accepted as wards of the state. When we say wards of the state, technically persons with disabilities were seen as responsibilities of the state or the government. However, they were taken care of in isolation. And as we have discussed in the Inclusion and Inclusive Education lecture, there was really no education at first during the era of asylum, but at least in the first few parts, they were treated as humane. However, the prevailing mindset at that time was still negative because they believed that once you are disabled, you will always be disabled. During the Renaissance era, since this was considered as an era of rebirth in terms of political, economic, arts, literature, education, etc., many people become involved and interested with the education of persons with disabilities. One of the early pioneers in special education is Pedro Ponce de Leon, who is considered to be the first person to develop a detailed documentation about the method for teaching the deaf, although it has been noted to be limited for the nobility. Since when we look back on history, it is the nobility who have all the opportunities and capability to educate their relatives who might have disabilities. The next one is Absalom Michel Julliard, who is known as a philanthropist and an educator at that time in France. Julliard founded the first school for the deaf, and that is why he is known as the father of the deaf. Aside from that, Julliard is also credited for creating a systematic method of teaching the hearing impaired and devoting his life to developing the world's first sign alphabet. The third one is still a French educator, and he is Louis Braille. He developed the Braille script, which is a system of writing and reading used by the visually impaired. Braille himself was visually impaired due to an accident when he was still young, and his own visual impairment is said to have brought about his development of the Braille script. Up until now, the system that Braille came up with remains unchanged and it is still used by visually impaired people. Those three are the early experienced pioneers of special needs education. The next pioneers are the ones who are considered to have focused more on a holistic approach on special needs education. The first one being Jean-Marc Ita, who is considered and recognized by many as one of the founding fathers of special education. Ita was the first person to develop a student-centered approach emphasizing the individual child, in which he suggested that special teaching methods could be effective in educating disabled children. This is evident on his notes and observations of the wild boy of Aveyron from 1801 to 1805. The wild boy of Aveyron, named Victor, was considered as a wild child because at that point in time they were thinking that Victor was neglected by his parents, so he got away from their home and fended for himself in the wild at an early age. To give you a picture of who Victor was, let's look at the notes of Pierre-Joseph Bonaterre. This note describes Victor. Victor is unusual to our food, selecting his nourishment by smell, but at the same time indifferent to fragrant or foul odors. Lying flat on the ground to drink, tearing garments placed upon him, and trying constantly to escape. Walking often on all fours, fighting with his teeth, giving few marks of intelligence, having no articulate language, even devoid of the faculty of speech. It was later discovered that the boy's hearing was insensitive to loud noises and to music, yet he readily heard the fall of a nut. His sense of touch was likewise deficient. As to sight, his eyes constantly wandered and could not be fixed on objects. The study was in part a success but also in part a failure because Itza was able to achieve a bit of his goals. Like Victor was able to establish a bit of a regular sleep schedule and have a bit of proper hygiene. However, it has failed because the things that were achieved by Victor did not really last for a long time. The main manifestation of it being that Victor still wanted to go back to his previous life in the wild. However, even if the study has successes and failures on the research or academic point of view, it was able to give us the first basis of special education needs. The first one, individualization of teaching methods. The second one, emotional bond between the educator and the learner. The third one, developing specific materials for the specific needs of the learners. And the third one, to design the content or structure the content in a way that is more digestible to your target learner. And the last one, segregation, because as it is obvious, Victor was an extreme case of being different at that point in time. After Itar's successful establishment of the first basis of special education needs, his co-academic and colleague who has worked with him, Edouard Seguin, was able to stress the importance of developing independence and self-reliance in disabled students, which should be conducted by presenting them with a combination of physical and intellectual tasks. This has been known as Seguin's physiological method, which became a several influential guideline for educating children with special needs. As you can see here, the physiological method has two main components, and those are the sensory training and the motor training. For sensory training, the training focuses on touch and the utilization of materials that would promote the sense of touch. For motor training, the considerations are the following. The tasks should be age appropriate to your target learner, and it should be from simple to complex, like relatively easy gross motor training, and then moving forward until you go to the complex fine motor skills trainings. It is also important to note that in the physiological method, the activities that should be included are functional activities, since one of Seguin's beliefs is that employment should be an outcome of education, which is why, as you can see on the last bullet, under motor training, work and play is combined when training special education students using the physiological method. The next one is an individual that you may already know or maybe just heard of because she is really famous in the field of education. Her name is Maria Montessori, and her main belief is that the environment can be designed to facilitate maximum independent learning and exploration by the child. The Montessori method is considered as a child-centered method that promotes the learner's freedom to explore different materials in their environment. But of course, the key term here is that the environment is prepared or engineered basically by the teachers. According to the studies of Marshall and the Supply Desk website, there are 5 principles of the Montessori method. The first one being the respect for the child, in a way that the teacher only remains as a facilitator. The learner or the child that is studying should not be interrupted while they are learning or concentrating or exploring on their own. Basically, the core idea of respecting the child in the Montessori approach is that you give them the freedom to make choices and to do things for themselves so that they could learn things for themselves as well. Then we have the second principle, which is the absorbent mind. This just means that Montessori believes that children learn from all of their experiences. Like when you are living your life, you are already learning. That's what the absorbent mind means. Then the third principle is the sensitive periods, in which Montessori believes that there are sensitive periods in which the children is ready to learn some skills. This varies from child to child because it depends on their growth and development. As a facilitator, the teacher is trained to see these sensitive periods and be there to assist the children when they need assistance or if they ask for assistance. Then the fourth principle is the prepared environment. Of course, this is actually the core of the Montessori method, in which the teachers and administrators actually should collaborate in preparing a learning environment with especially designed materials and probably engineered or tailored experiences that would help the teacher learn in an orderly and independent way. And the last one, auto-education, when you think about it, it's actually aligned to the first principle, the respect for the child. In auto-education, you have to trust the child that they are capable of educating themselves. The last one for the pioneers of special education is Alfred Crowley, who had a lot of writings and contributions to the special education niche. In 1901, he founded a school for children with mild disabilities. He believed that 3 factors determined education, regardless of whether it is special education or the new or progressive type of education. The first one being the child itself, which he labeled as the biological factor. The second one being the environment, including the human beings that the child interact with, which was labeled as the sociological factor. And the last one, the third factor, is the combined influences of the biological factor and the sociological factor to the child's psychological development, which he labeled as the psychological factor. As I have said, there are a lot of other contributions of Crowley in the field of special needs education. However, those studies and the efforts of other people in promoting special needs education or special education is still not an internationally appreciated effort or movement at that point in time. To the point that in 1910, Dr. Anne Moore was still considering that the feeble-minded or the persons with disabilities were considered to be a menace to the society and to the civilization of human beings in general. The solution that was proposed by the eugenics section of the American Breeders Association in 1911 is that there should be lifelong segregation of feeble-minded individuals from those that they consider as normal individuals, specifically during the reproductive period, or feeble-minded individuals should be sterilized. Of course, those ideas were battled by different movements which happened around the 1910s to the 1950s, where compulsory education or specific classes or schools for the mentally retarded, blind, deaf, and other disabilities were considered. Specifically, after the World War II, the creation of the special education system was organized in parallel to the ordinary or regular system. This specifically happened in the USA, and this is considered as the special needs segregated education or segregation. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the special needs education that is segregated? Let's start with the advantages. People with disabilities have a chance to be successful because they will be trained in segregated schools so that they could go out of those schools and become trained to become a normal part of the society. Second one is it promotes cooperation rather than competition because the persons with disability and those that are considered as normal or ordinary are just following the systems that are assigned to them. You know, like cooperating with the rules of the special education system and sticking by the rules of the regular or ordinary school system if you are a normal or ordinary citizen. The third one is learn physical and social skills in an environment that understands and accepts them, which means that they are contained in a location and a system that accommodates them, which is why they learn their physical and social skills with people that understand them and accepts their situation. The fourth advantage of segregated special needs education is that there are staff which are trained for giving special needs education to the differently abled, and there are also specialized services and equipment for special needs education. The fifth one is they are able to improve the skills that increase participation in more integrative situations because they are comfortable with the system that accommodates them. The segregated system, which makes them more confident about interacting with those trained staff using specialized equipment and specialized services. The next one is individual attention is easier to obtain. Again, because the persons with disabilities are isolated or contained within one area or one system. And the last one is they are able to meet between individuals carrying the same disability because they are together in that segregated system. However, the disadvantages of the segregated special needs education are the following. First one, they learn the skills, values, and attitudes and behaviors that are labeled or considered as for the disabled. The expectations of their parents, other professionals, as well as their children are also reduced, prioritizing their disability. The third one is somehow they become complacent in a way that they oppose the transfer of skills from specialized settings to the normal settings, or sometimes they find it difficult to transfer the skills from specialized settings to what the society sees as normal settings. The fourth one is that the normal society is denying the psychological and social benefits that result from meeting disabled children. Because technically, if you isolate or contain disabled people within their own system, the society's mindset about differences will not evolve. The next one is that special needs education that is segregated is actually based on an idea of what people consider as normal and their performance aligning with that normality. Another disadvantage is that there is a loss of links with the community and poor preparation for future life. Because, as stated earlier, they sometimes oppose to transfer the skills that they have obtained in the special system towards the normal system of the society. And they get too adapted to the special system that they cannot really adapt to the normal system. Next is cost important and lifelong in a way that many parents want their children to just be there on special education schools and not be pulled away from that. However, if that happens, there is a greater demand for admission of new cases and the special education systems become overpopulated. Then the last one, the interactions are mostly with adults and not with other children. Adults in a way that these are their trainers and teachers that they interact with. The disadvantages of the special needs education that is segregated actually outweighed the advantages, which is why many movements that want to stop segregation has come up. One of the ideas that popped at that time during the 1990s is the idea of inclusion, which was defined by Steinbach and Steinbach in 1990 as education of all students in regular classes using appropriate educational programs for every student where everyone is accepted and supported. Strengthening that movement is the UNESCO Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action in 1994, which stated that students with special needs must have access to regular schools with adapted education. This actually means that the regular schools are the ones that will adapt or transform themselves to accommodate students with special needs. Aside from that, the Salamanca Statement also states that regular schools with an inclusive orientation are the most effective means of combating and preventing discriminative attitudes and building up an inclusive society. However, as we have discussed in inclusion and inclusive education, there are still a lot of challenges in the implementation of inclusion and inclusive education, which is why strategies in special education are still part of things that we use as strategies to maybe finally reach full inclusion in the near future. One of those strategies is integration or mainstreaming, in which we all know that integration means moving persons with disabilities into schools or societies normally as much as possible. And this integration can be just physical or could include social and maybe could include pedagogical. That's why we have different considerations or levels of integration. This could be also identified as the selective placement of special education students in one or more regular education classes. This is an example of how integration or mainstreaming works. As you can see on the left part of the image, we have an arrow on the left that measures that the more you go up the words on the right, the more the physical integration is. And the more you go down on the words on the left, the physical integration becomes less. So basically, when you do mainstreaming, the target is to have the most physical integration. And then if the special education student cannot handle mainstreaming, you could do general education or just a collaborative consultation with the regular school system. If that is still not possible, we have the resource room, which is a room in regular schools which could be used by special education students where they could stay a few hours a day. If that is still not possible for the special education students, we have the self-contained class or the class that is within the regular school system, but still the people you interact with are special needs people as well, and you have a specialized instruction that is being conducted on that class. If that is still not possible, we have the idea of special day school, in which you only physically go to the regular school during the special days set by your instructors. And then we have the hospital or homebound instruction, which is self-explanatory. You are either on an institution or at home. And if that is still not possible, the last one is the residential schools, which are specialized segregated schools. In line with this graphic on physical integration and mainstreaming, we have this concept of least restrictive environment. This concept means that to the maximum extent, children with disabilities are to be educated with children who are not disabled. However, removal may occur when education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. This concept is elaborated on this picture. As you can see on the right, there is an arrow going up, which means that as you go up the pyramid, there is an increasing severity of the needs of the persons with disabilities as well as an increasing restrictiveness of the environment. So we start with the environment that is not restrictive at all. That one yellow block which has full-day regular class placement. It's not restrictive. The severity of the needs of the special education student is not that different as compared to the ordinary or normal students. Then, you go to the base of the pyramid, which actually means that the severity has increased and the restrictiveness of the environment has increased as well. It's a full day regular class placement with consultation services for the teacher. The next block up is full day regular class placement with instruction delivered in regular class by a specialist. Then the third one is part day regular class placement and part day regular or itinerant services, which means that in the third block, the special education student goes on the regular class a part of the day and another part is spent on the resource room. On the fourth block, we have a part of the day is spent on the regular class and a part of the day is spent on a special class. Then the fifth block states that there is a full day placement in a special class and social integration with general school population. Just a social integration or interaction with the general school population, but the student is fully immersed or placed in special class. Then we have block 6, which is a full day placement contained within a special class. And then block 7 is full day placement in a special school. It is a specific separate school. After the special school is the 8th block, which is a more restrictive environment and entails that there is a lot of severity in the needs of the special education student, and that is the full-time placement in residential facilities. You may ask me, Ma'am, what's the difference between special schools and residential facilities? In special schools, you are still allowed to go home after your classes. You're just going to a separate special school that is different from the system of the regular school system. On the other hand, residential facilities, you become a resident of that facility or of that institution to be educated there. Then the last one, or the most restrictive, is the home or hospital placement. However, we all know that integration or mainstreaming is still related to the traditional idea of special education like segregation, because the person with disability still has to be categorized, as is seen on this picture, based on the severity of their needs plus the restrictiveness of the environment that should be allowed of them. I have stated a lot of times that this system works especially if the idea of inclusion and inclusive education are still budding or still new to a specific community. And this is evident on the advantages of integration or mainstreaming. First, it promotes diversity and acceptance in a way that it shows that there are differences among people and we should accept those differences. Second one, it allows opportunities for all students to advance because persons with disabilities are still given a chance to be a part of the regular school system. Then the third one, students with learning disabilities are motivated through competition to improve. This is because they are expected to compete with those that are part of the regular school system, and they are also expected to compete among themselves and with their past selves so that they could follow the regular school system. The next is general education students have the ability to rise up to leadership roles. And the last one, there is a collaboration with separate special services. However, even if there are positives or advantages to integration and mainstreaming, there are still disadvantages. We have accepting segregation. It seems like when you implement integration and mainstreaming, you are accepting the idea of segregation, specifically that pyramid on the restrictiveness on the environment plus the severity of the needs of the persons with disabilities. And once you accept segregation, comes the next disadvantage, which is stigmatization. Because you already accepted that people are segregated, so there will be stigma on the labels or categories or segregation of people, especially within the disability spectrum, because you have labeled them that there are people who could follow the regular school system and there are some of them who cannot, specifically those at the top of the pyramid that was shown earlier. And of course, children still stay in the most segregated settings, and technically, the general schools did not change. But again, integration and mainstreaming are good strategies when inclusion and inclusive education are not really that feasible yet. Because the barriers in special education are also the same barriers that are being faced in inclusive education. And if you cannot solve that within special education, how much more do you expect those barriers and challenges to be overcome in the broader sense in inclusion and inclusive education? And that ends the discussion video on special education. That would be all in this video. Thank you and have a good day.